November 1943. Over the freezing skies of Western Europe. The air trembled with the roar of engines as American and German fighters clashed in a deadly ballet of steel and smoke. At 30,000 feet, where oxygen was thin and death was only seconds away, the Luftwaffe's veteran pilots once again believed they owned the sky. They had seen the twin-boomed American fighter before, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. It was fast, yes, but they had mocked it. Too big, they said. Too heavy. It can't dive. It will never match our Messerschmitts. But that winter, something changed. When the dogfights began, German pilots pulled their Bf-109s and FW-190s into steep dives, the maneuver that had always saved them before. But this time, the Lightning followed. Not just followed, it closed the distance. At first, they thought it was luck. Then panic spread. The P-38s weren't breaking apart anymore. They weren't losing control in the dive. They were faster, steadier, deadlier. Because deep inside a Lockheed hangar months earlier, American engineers had built a secret weapon the Germans never expected. The dive recovery flap. A simple invention that turned the clumsy Lightning into a predator that could outdive even the best the Luftwaffe had. This is the story of how a single innovation, born of desperation, tested by courage, and perfected through blood, changed the balance of power in the skies over Europe. It began in 1937 in a quiet office at Lockheed Aircraft Corporation in Burbank, California. The U.S. Army Air Corps had just issued a challenge: design a fighter that could fly faster, higher, and farther than anything else on Earth. A single-seat interceptor that could climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes and reach speeds of over 360 miles per hour. Unthinkable numbers for the time. Most aircraft companies dismissed it as impossible. But a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson didn't. With a team of visionaries, men who would later form the legendary Skunk Works, he set out to design a fighter so radical that it looked like it came from the future. The result was the XP-38, a sleek, twin-boom machine unlike anything ever seen in the sky. Its twin Allison V-1710 engines gave it immense power, while a central nacelle housed the pilot and a deadly battery of guns, 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all firing straight ahead with perfect accuracy. It was fast, symmetrical, and lethal, a perfect union of art and engineering. But with such innovation came new dangers. The P-38's speed pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible in flight. As it approached transonic speeds during steep dives, strange and terrifying forces took hold. The nose would suddenly pitch down, and no matter how hard pilots pulled, the aircraft refused to recover. Some died trying. Others barely lived to tell the story. No one understood it, not even the engineers. To the pilots, it felt like a curse. The faster the P-38 went, the deadlier it became to its own men. It was called compressibility, a phenomenon caused by air molecules stacking up on the aircraft's wings as it neared the speed of sound. No fighter pilot in history had ever faced it before. Throughout 1941 and 1942, Lockheed wrestled with the problem. Test pilots risked their lives, diving again and again, trying to find the limits. Some aircraft disintegrated midair. Others slammed into the California desert. The war was spreading fast, and the Army needed results. Still, Johnson and his engineers refused to give up. They redesigned control surfaces, reinforced the airframe, and studied airflow with every tool they had. Yet the mystery remained unsolved. The Lightning could climb like a rocket, but its dives were a gamble with death. Then came Pearl Harbor, and the United States was thrust into global war. The P-38, despite its flaws, was one of the few long-range fighters ready for combat. It was fast, powerful, and, crucially, it could fly a high altitude where bombers operated. America needed it, and needed it now. So, the Lightning was rushed into service, flaws and all. Over the Pacific, over North Africa, and eventually over Europe, young pilots took the twin-engine beast into battle. Some called it magnificent. Others called it dangerous. But all agreed there was nothing like it. And as 1943 approached, that magnificent, dangerous machine would soon reveal its true potential. After one critical discovery, turned its deadliest flaw into its greatest strength. When the P-38 Lightning first arrived in the skies over Europe in 1942, it looked like something out of science fiction. German pilots nicknamed it Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. They had never seen a twin-engine fighter with that kind of speed or range before. But while the name was meant as mockery, it soon became a warning whispered among Luftwaffe squadrons. Yet beneath its futuristic frame, the Lightning was still haunted by its past. The same problem that had plagued it during testing, compressibility, followed it into combat. At high altitude, the Lightning was king. Its turbo-supercharged engines could outclimb anything the Germans had. But in a dogfight, when a pilot tried to escape by diving, the Lightning sometimes betrayed him. As speed increased, the control stick froze solid, the aircraft's nose locked downward, and the pilot would watch helplessly as the Earth rushed toward him at terminal velocity. Some tried cutting power or deploying flaps to slow the fall. Some blacked out from the G-forces before their aircraft broke apart. Others miraculously survived because the thick air near the ground restored control at the last moment. Reports flooded back from the European theater. P-38 unrecoverable past 420 miles per hour. Stick freezes and dive. Pilot killed, probable compressibility. At Lockheed, the mood turned grim. Engineers pored over flight data, desperate for a solution. They studied photographs, airflow models, even handmade clay mock-ups. Kelly Johnson himself spent sleepless nights trying to understand why his masterpiece was killing the very men it was meant to protect. In the meantime, the Lightning's reputation among pilots began to split. To the veterans who understood its quirks, it was an unbeatable machine, a long-range escort with firepower and speed no single-engine fighter could match. But to the rookies, it was unpredictable, even cursed. In England, the 20th Fighter Group took the Lightning into combat against the Luftwaffe for the first time. They escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, Bremen, Hanover, Schweinfurt, battling flak, cold, and German fighters at 30,000 feet. But the weather in Europe was brutal, the missions long, and every flight a test of endurance. German Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s often attacked from above, forcing Lightning pilots into defensive dives. Many never pulled out. Back home, newspapers and command reports began questioning the P-38's role. It was too big, too complex, too expensive, some said. But for all its flaws, it remained the only American fighter that could reach deep into German airspace and back. The war couldn't wait for perfection. Then came a breakthrough from the pilots themselves. They began experimenting. Some tried easing the stick instead of forcing it. Others cut throttle at high speed, or changed the dive angle slightly. Patterns began to emerge. A few pilots noticed that dropping the landing flaps slightly seemed to help them regain control during a dive. It was dangerous. The airspeed could tear the flaps off entirely, but it hinted at something profound. Lockheed engineers took notice. Perhaps the answer wasn't brute strength, but airflow manipulation. By mid-1943, as the air war over Europe intensified, they began to design a small, retractable flap under each wing, a device that could change the pressure distribution, restore lift, and give pilots back control in the deadly high-speed dives. It would be called the Dive Recovery Flap, and it was about to transform the Lightning from a flawed marvel into one of the most formidable fighters in the world. By the summer of 1943, the engineers at Lockheed had reached their breaking point. Too many reports of fatal dives, too many letters sent home to grieving families. The P-38 Lightning, the aircraft that was supposed to redefine American air power, was turning into a paradox. Fast enough to catch the enemy, but too unstable to survive the chase. Then, deep inside a wind tunnel at Muroc Army Airfield in the Mojave Desert, an engineer named Edward Horkey noticed something strange. When he placed a small metal plate just forward of the wing's center of pressure, the model aircraft suddenly regained balance in the airflow. The nose lifted. The buffeting stopped. It was the eureka moment they'd been waiting for. If they could build a small, strong flap that extended into the airstream during a dive, altering the airflow just enough to restore control, the Lightning could finally break free of its greatest flaw. The solution was elegant, almost simple. A pair of dive recovery flaps, mounted under each wing near the midsection, that would deploy only during high-speed dives. Kelly Johnson pushed his team relentlessly to perfect the mechanism. They tested it at every altitude, every angle. The results were staggering. Pilots could now dive past 500 miles per hour and still pull out smoothly, their aircraft intact. For the first time, the P-38 could go as fast as gravity allowed and still live to climb again. The next step was proof in the sky. In August 1943, test pilot Ben Kelsey, one of the original Lightning advocates, climbed into the cockpit of a modified P-38J and took off from Burbank. Over the desert, he rolled the Lightning onto its back and pushed the nose straight down. The altimeter spun like a clock gone mad. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. The airspeed indicator needle buried past 500. He flipped the switch. The flaps deployed. The stick came alive. The Lightning obeyed. When Kelsey landed, the crew rushed toward him. He said only 5 words. "She flies through anything now." It was the moment that changed everything. The P-38J and later P-38L models rolled off the production lines with dive recovery flaps as standard equipment. For the pilots flying long escort missions over Europe, it was like being handed a new aircraft. The same machine that once threatened to kill them in a dive was now a weapon of unmatched versatility. When the Luftwaffe next faced the Lightning, they were in for a shock. German doctrine relied on one last escape maneuver, the power dive. If a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf pilot was losing a fight, he'd push the nose down and let gravity do the work. His lighter, single-engine aircraft would outdive the heavier American fighter, and survival depended on it. But that winter, when the 8th Air Force resumed its daylight bombing campaigns deep into Germany, something terrifying began to happen. Messerschmitts dove to escape, and the Lightnings followed. The P-38s didn't stall, didn't compress, didn't break apart. They just kept coming, silver streaks cutting through the sky like twin-tailed arrows. The hunters had become the hunted. For the first time, Luftwaffe pilots reported being outdived by an American aircraft. Panic spread through the fighter groups. They had underestimated the Lightning, and now it was too late. Winter, 1943 to 1944. The sky over Europe had turned into a frozen battlefield of thunder and fire. The Luftwaffe still believed it could break the American bomber offensive, sending waves of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs into the high, thin air above Germany. But the Americans were coming with something new, something the Germans didn't yet understand. The P-38 Lightning, once mocked for its size and quirks, now flew with a quiet, terrifying confidence. Its pilots no longer feared the dive. They owned it. When the first engagements began over France and the Rhineland, German interceptors swooped in as they always had, climbing fast, firing a burst, then rolling over into a steep dive to escape. But this time, the familiar script broke apart. The Lightnings followed, not falling behind, not losing control, but gaining. From 30,000 feet, a P-38 could drop like a spear. The dive recovery flaps deployed automatically at 350 miles per hour, and the big twin-engine fighter knifed downward in perfect control, its Allison engines howling. Below, Luftwaffe pilots stared in disbelief as the silver shape behind them grew larger, closer, unstoppable. December 13th, 1943, Bremen, Germany. Lieutenant Jack Ilfrey and his squadron of P-38s from the 20th Fighter Group spotted a flight of Messerschmitt Bf 109s making a pass at the bomber stream. As the Germans peeled off into a dive, Ilfrey rolled inverted and followed. His airspeed soared past 480 miles per hour. Normally, this was the moment when a P-38 would freeze, the controls locking solid, but not anymore. He eased back, felt the response, and lined up his shot. Two 20mm shells flashed by. Ilfrey's reply was 8.50 caliber Brownings. In a burst that lasted less than 2 seconds, the Messerschmitt disintegrated mid-dive, its pieces scattering through the cloud layer. The rest of the German formation never made another attack. Word spread quickly among American units. The dive is ours now. The Luftwaffe tried to adjust. They began to warn their pilots not to dive too steeply when engaged with P-38s, advice that went against every instinct a fighter pilot had. Others switched tactics, trying to lure the Lightnings into turning fights, where lighter German aircraft still held the edge. But the P-38 wasn't built for turning duels anymore. It was built to strike from above, hit with overwhelming force, and climb away untouched. The psychological shift was immense. For months, German airmen had dismissed the Lightning as the twin-boomed coffin. Now it was the aircraft they feared most at altitude. Reports from JG-11 and JG-26, two of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter groups, began to include new phrases: lightning attacks from vertical position, recovery impossible, cannot outrun. The Americans, on the other hand, found themselves in love with their machine. The P-38 could climb high with bombers, dive fast with interceptors, and still carry its pilots home on 2 engines even after absorbing heavy fire. It was fast, stable, and, for the first time, predictable. The dive recovery flap had done more than fix a design flaw. It had rewritten the rules of air combat. It gave U.S. pilots the confidence to pursue the enemy in any direction, at any speed. In the skies over Berlin and the Ruhr, Lightning squadrons began to develop a deadly new tactic called boom and zoom. From high above, pairs of P-38s would dive together at tremendous speed, fire a brief but devastating burst, then climb back to altitude before German fighters could react. The Luftwaffe, already stretched thin and exhausted, found itself fighting ghosts, enemies that struck from the stratosphere and vanished before they could counterattack. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe's illusion of control over the upper atmosphere was shattered. The P-38, once seen as an experimental oddity, had become a precision instrument of domination. Every dive, every kill was a message. America had mastered not just technology, but the physics of fear itself. By the dawn of 1944, the air war over Europe had entered its decisive phase. The Allies knew that control of the skies was the key to the coming invasion, and the Luftwaffe was still their greatest obstacle. For the American bomber crews, the daylight raids into Germany were a gauntlet of fire and steel. Every mission meant hundreds of lives hanging in the balance, every mile bringing them closer to death. But high above those bomber formations, cutting through the thin, freezing air, flew the P-38 Lightning, its twin engines roaring like defiance itself. The introduction of dive recovery flaps had transformed the aircraft into something almost mythic. Where once it had struggled to stay in formation, now it led the charge. The Lightnings escorted B-17s and B-24s deeper into enemy territory than ever before, beyond Berlin, even to the heart of the Reich. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin by losses in Russia and Italy, was now forced to fight a two-front air war. Its pilots, veterans of the Battle of Britain, were being replaced by younger, less experienced men, often with fewer than a dozen hours of combat training. Against them came squadrons of battle-hardened American pilots, flying machines that no longer feared the dive, the climb, or the chase. March 1944, Berlin. The first daylight raid on the German capital. The sky was thick with contrails and smoke. B-17 formations lumbered toward their targets, their gunners bracing for the inevitable swarm of fighters. But instead of being overwhelmed, they watched in awe as their escorts dove from above, lightnings slashing down through the clouds, guns blazing. German fighters tried to pull away, to escape in the familiar power dive that had saved them so many times before. But the old maneuver was useless now. The P-38s followed, relentless, their flaps slicing the air with perfect precision. Lightning pilots no longer backed off at 400 miles per hour. They pushed through it. One German pilot, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Schnell, later recalled. They came down after us like arrows. We could not shake them. The P-38, it hunted us even in the dive. That had never happened before. The psychological impact was devastating. For years, the Luftwaffe had been the hunter. Now it was being hunted by American pilots who seemed to defy physics itself. The Lightning's dominance wasn't just about speed or technology. It was about endurance. With its long range and twin-engine reliability, the P-38 could escort bombers all the way to Germany and back, something the smaller P-47 Thunderbolts couldn't yet manage. Pilots began to refer to their aircraft as their guardian angel, and to bomber crews, the silhouette of the twin tails meant one thing: survival. Behind the lines, in war rooms across England, the data told the story. German losses were skyrocketing. Every mission cost the Luftwaffe aircraft they could not replace. And as the P-38s cleared the skies, the bombers struck deeper, destroying fuel depots, aircraft factories, and transportation hubs, the very lifelines of Hitler's war machine. But the Lightning's story wasn't just about destruction. It was about redemption. The same aircraft, once plagued by fear and failure, had become a symbol of American resilience and ingenuity. Every P-38 diving out of the sun was proof that a problem could be solved, that what once seemed impossible could be mastered. By the spring of 1944, the tide of the air war had turned. The Luftwaffe was bleeding, the skies were clearing, and Allied planners began to whisper about the invasion of France, D-Day. And when that day came, it would be the Lightning's wings that helped secure the skies over Normandy, ensuring that the men below could fight their battle under a shield of American air power. The Germans had underestimated the P-38. Now, it was rewriting the very fate of the war. By the summer of 1944, the skies over Europe belonged to the Allies. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of the continent, was shattered. Its fuel supplies dwindled, its veteran pilots were gone, and its factories lay in ruins. And among the many engines of that victory, none shone brighter than the sleek, twin-boomed silhouette of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The aircraft that had once terrified its own pilots had become the terror of the Reich. Its dive recovery flaps, those small, simple pieces of metal, had rewritten what was possible in the air. Where German fighters once escaped by plunging earthward, now they found death waiting behind them, carried on twin streams of contrails and .50 caliber fire. Across Europe, bomber crews looked up through shattered glass and smoke-filled skies and saw the glint of twin tails overhead. To them, it meant life, their Lightning escorts holding the line between survival and oblivion. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the P-38 was everywhere, strafing columns of German armor in Normandy, destroying rail lines and bridges across France, hunting enemy aircraft from dawn till dusk. Pilots spoke of the aircraft as if it were alive, a machine that had grown up with them, learned their fears, and overcome them. It wasn't just an airplane anymore. It was a statement of innovation, courage, and the relentless American refusal to accept defeat. The Germans never expected that a design flaw could become a weapon. They never expected that a nation half a world away would find the answer, not in brute strength, but in engineering genius. And when the Lightnings came screaming down from the heavens, faster and steadier than anything else in the sky, they realized, too late, that the rules of the hunt had changed forever. By the war's end, over 10,000 P-38s had been built. They flew in every major theater, from the deserts of North Africa to the islands of the Pacific, and their pilots became legends. Names like Richard Bong, Thomas Maguire, and Charles McDonald would go down in history as some of the greatest aces who ever lived. But beyond the numbers, beyond the victories, there was something deeper, the story of how persistence turned tragedy into triumph. The Lightning was proof that when you refuse to surrender to your failures, when you push through fear and doubt, you can rise higher than you ever imagined. In every dive, in every desperate pullout, in every flight through the clouds of war, The P-38 Lightning carried with it the spirit of innovation that would define the future of American aviation. From the ashes of challenge came mastery. From danger, dominance. And from the heart of war, the birth of a legend. So the next time you see that unmistakable twin-tailed silhouette cutting through archival footage, remember what it stood for. Not just speed or firepower, but the courage to face the dive and recover stronger. Hit that like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories of history's turning points.